Welcome back to 1834, chess friends. It's 5 games to 2 to Bourdonnais. He only needs to win one more game to win the whole third match, whereas McDonnell needs to win 4 in a row, so an uphill battle for him. We have Baldric on the commentary, and well, let's begin. We have d4 from Bourdonnais, d5, c4, so the Queen's Gambit, and of course everybody knows that a gentleman must accept a Gambit, and McDonnell accepts, as we all knew he would, and we have e3. The next few moves were last seen in game number 7, so we'll go through them quickly. We have e5, and now the bishop captures, the pawns capture in the center, and knight to f6, knight to c3, bishop to d6, knight to f3, castles from McDonnell, h3 from Bourdonnais, and rook to e8 with check, and Bourdonnais blocks. Previously, McDonnell played his bishop to f4, everything piled up on the e3 square. He tried to win a pawn, but then he got his rook trapped and lost the game within 30 moves. So this time he tries something different. He plays knight to c6, and we carry on with castles, h6, and then a3 in the opposite corner from Bourdonnais. And at this point, McDonnell plays his light square bishop to f5. So it looks like he's playing a little bit more conservatively, trying to develop his pieces early. Here, Bourdonnais can't resist pushing his g4 pawn and attacking the bishop. So a good move for McDonnell might be bishop back to h7, but he can't resist a good bishop sacrifice, so he captures the pawn. Is it worth it? Well, even if it's not sound, Bourdonnais is going to have to play very precisely. He, of course, captures the gambited bishop. The knight captures the pawn back, and now we have queen to d3. So Bourdonnais is fully developed, though his king side is looking a little bit weak. We continue with queen to f6, and now king to g2, knight back to e7, and Bourdonnais is a whole bishop up because McDonnell can't help but sacrifice a bishop when the opportunity arises. So Bourdonnais should think about trying to exchange the pieces off the table evenly. For example, knight to d5 attacking the queen would force a knight exchange. But instead of this idea, he goes for knight to e4 instead, which again attacks the queen, but the knight exchange isn't on the table. So McDonnell moves his queen aside, and this puts the white king in trouble. It's under an x-ray now. So the best move for Bourdonnais might be to move his king to h1, and then after knight to f5, knight capture bishop, the pawn captures the knight, the bishop comes around the knight to try to help defend the king. The pawn advances, so the bishop moves aside, attacks the rook, but McDonnell can now deliver a check with the queen. But after the king moves back to g2 and the queen moves back, then we're going to repeat, and Bourdonnais will stand some chances. He may be able to hold on. But instead of all of this, instead of the king to h1 move here, Bourdonnais instead brings his knight back to g3, and McDonnell is able to start a good attack here. The knight captures the bishop with check, and Baldric here suggests capturing back with the pawn, but if you were to do that, then the queen would capture the knight in front of the king with check, and it's backed up by the dark squared bishop, and the white king is in a whole heap of trouble. So thanks Baldric, but don't play that move, it's bad. So instead the queen is forced to capture the knight. However, this puts it in front of the rook here, and after McDonnell plays knight to f5, there's a double attack on the queen, so the queen moves aside to d3. But at the same time, there is now a triple attack on this knight here. So again, Baldric suggests taking with the knight, but if you were to do this, then the queen would be capturing the black queen, and the pawn is pinned, so you can't capture the queen back. You've lost the queen. So thanks, Baldric, but not such a great idea. So instead, McDonnell plays the bishop captures, and the pawn captures back, and now the queen comes in with check. It also looks very bad. Notice here as well that McDonnell now has 3 connected passed pawns. These are looking very potential, a lot of potential for disaster from Bourdonnais' point of view. So after this check, we have king to h1. McDonnell continues his attack with knight to e3, backed up by the rook. Now he's obviously looking to bring his queen to g2 for checkmate, and he's at the same time attacking the rook here. So what does Bourdonnais do? He captures the pawn on f7 with check, which is very interesting. Baldric suggests a good move for McDonnell might be to capture the bishop, but if you were to do this, you'd walk into queen to b3 with check, and whatever the king does from here, he's in a lot of trouble and the tables are turned. For example, king back to f8, you're going to move the knight, and this is revealing a check from the rook. And you can't just capture with the knight here because it's immediate checkmate. So yeah, don't do this bishop captures move, no matter what Baldric says. But thank you anyway, Baldric. We have king to h8 instead, and now king to g6, and the black king is quite surrounded. He looks to be very much on the ropes. Now the checkmate on g2 isn't on anymore because the white queen is getting in the way. So what's the best move for McDonnell? It's not to exchange queens because he's still a piece down. It is actually to deliver another check here, because after the king moves, you have time to get the rook down into the game on e4, and Bourdonnais is going to have to try to bring his rook around the king to help defend. But after the black rook comes across and delivers a check, it forks the queen, and you're going to be losing your queen. So, for example, captures the rook, the queen captures back, there's nothing to capture the black queen. So that would be a good move for McDonnell to deliver another check. But instead, he captures the rook with his knight, and he has lost his momentum. So the rook captures the knight, which also defends the white knight, but McDonnell just checks with the queen. So the king moves aside, and now McDonnell brings his rook into play to e3, attacking the knight. Now, to defend this, Bourdonnais must play his queen back to g2, which covers everything, but he blunders and instead plays the rook to f2. Now, McDonnell is just free to pick up the knight, which he does. You might think that capturing the rook with the rook would be fine, but after the queen captures the rook, you can clearly see that McDonnell is up a rook for a bishop, and he has more pawns, so he's clearly winning. So instead of capturing the rook back here, he just lets the knight go, and he brings his rook in front of the king. Now, the rook captures the bishop, the white queen captures the rook, and at this point, McDonnell is winning by 2 clear pawns and really ought to win this. In the meantime, Bourdonnais is actually threatening checkmate here with his queen and his rook, so McDonnell defends by attacking the white king with the queen, and it also attacks the central pawn here. So Bourdonnais brings his queen back to block and offer a queen exchange in defense, which McDonnell is very pleased to accept because he's still up by 2 pawns and is very much expected to win this. McDonnell continues by attacking the central white pawn, and of course Bourdonnais defends, and McDonnell advances his rook to d7. It's now on the second rank here, nicely defending all of his pawns. And obviously we are well into the end game here, so both players are going to advance their kings towards the centre. Bourdonnais starts us off with king to f2, and McDonnell continues with king to h7. King to f3, and McDonnell attacks the white rook here. Now, Bourdonnais should probably keep it on the same rank by moving to e4, keep an eye on his central pawn, but instead he has a different idea, very interesting. He goes to f6, he leaves the pawn undefended, but McDonnell first attacks the rook, which moves across, and now McDonnell picks up the undefended pawn, but Bourdonnais is able to deliver a check here, and after the king moves, he picks up the c7 pawn. McDonnell checks, and the king moves towards the centre. So after all of that, you can see that McDonnell is still winning by 2 connected passed pawns. First of all, he plays his rook across to b3 to attack the weak white pawn here, so Bourdonnais comes back to defend it, but McDonnell is now going to start pushing. We have rook to d2, and the pawns keep coming. King to f4 to try to stop them, but it's a bit of a forlorn hope. The rook comes across to deliver a check protected by the pawn, so the king moves back to e5. We now have king to g5, McDonnell making progress up the board. Rook back to d7, attacking the black pawns at the rear here. The rook comes across to b3 to defend again, and of course it's simultaneously attacking the white pawn, so the rook comes down again. We have, again, pushing the pawn to g3, and the rook goes to d8, trying to get behind here to check and then capture the pawn if it moves another square forward. But it doesn't. Instead, the king moves to g4. And now we have rook to g8 with check. So the king advances to h3. We have king to f4 and h4. And it's inevitable, surely, that McDonnell will get these pawns to promote. And Bourdonnais knew this too and resigned at this point. So the score is now 5-3 to Bourdonnais. Will he be able to cross the finish line, or will McDonnell be able to close the gap even further? Join me again next time to find out what happens next. See you then.